I was standing on my front porch, drinking my morning coffee and watching the Tennessee sunrise paint the Smoky Mountains gold, when a white Mercedes SUV pulled into my driveway like it owned the place. A woman in her late 40s stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing what I can only describe as suburban battle armor, pressed khakis, a crisp white blouse, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her blonde hair was styled in that aggressively perfect way that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," from a mile away. "Can I help you?" I called out, setting my mug down on the porch railing. She marched up to my property line, stopping just short of actually stepping onto my land. "Smart woman. Are you Travis Anderson?" "That would be me." "And you are Brenda Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your property immediately." I almost laughed. My family had owned this 120 acres since 1847. My great-great-great-grandfather, William Anderson, had bought this land with money he saved from working as a blacksmith after immigrating from Scotland. The original deed was framed in my living room, yellowed with age but still perfectly legible. Meadowbrook Hills was a planned community that had sprung up around my property about 15 years ago, and they had been a thorn in my side ever since. "There's nothing to discuss, madam. This property isn't part of your HOA, never has been, never will be." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Anderson, that's where you're mistaken. According to county records, this parcel falls within our community boundaries. You've been receiving notices for months about violations." "I've been throwing them in the trash for months," I corrected, "because they don't apply to me. My property predates your HOA by over a century and a half." She pulled a stack of papers from her clipboard and thrust them toward me. I walked down from the porch and took them, more out of curiosity than anything else. As I flipped through the pages, my blood started to boil. There were citations for unapproved structures referring to my grandfather's workshop, complaints about my unkempt lawn, which was actually native wildflower meadow that my grandmother had planted, and a demand that I paint my house to match the approved color palette of beige, gray, or cream. "This is ridiculous," I said, handing the papers back to her. "My house has been barn red since 1923. It's staying barn red. Mr. Anderson, if you don't comply with these citations, we'll be forced to take legal action. The fines have accumulated to $15,000. "Good luck collecting on fines I don't owe. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I turned and walked back toward my house, but Brenda wasn't finished. "We have a meeting scheduled with county officials next week. This matter will be resolved one way or another. I suggest you hire an attorney." Her Mercedes kicked up dust as she drove away, and I stood there feeling the anger rise in my chest. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to mess with my family's land. When I was a kid, a developer had offered my father a fortune for the property. Dad had turned him down without a second thought. "This land is who we are," he had told me. "The moment we sell it, we lose a piece of ourselves." Dad had passed away 3 years ago, lung cancer that took him too fast and too young at 61. Mom had followed 18 months later, her heart giving out in her sleep. The grief counselor said she died of a broken heart, and I believed it. They had been married for 38 years and were never apart for more than a day or two. Now it was just me and my younger sister, Lauren, and she lived in Seattle working as a software engineer. The land was mine to protect. I went inside and dug through my filing cabinet until I found the folder with all our property documents. The original deed, transfers through generations, tax records going back decades, survey maps, everything. I had digitized most of it after Mom passed, but I kept the originals in a fireproof safe. My hands shook slightly as I looked through the papers. This was my heritage, my family's blood and sweat turned into soil and structure. My phone rang. It was my buddy Marcus Chen, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm in Knoxville. "Marcus, I need a lawyer recommendation. HOA trouble. The Meadowbrook people again." "Yeah, but it's escalating. They're claiming my property is part of their jurisdiction and trying to fine me 15 grand. Marcus whistled low. "That's serious, Travis. You need someone who specializes in property law. Let me make some calls. My boss knows everyone in that field." "I appreciate it." "They want me at some county meeting next week." "Don't go alone. Seriously. These HOA disputes can get nasty fast, especially when there's old property involved. Sometimes there are weird legal loopholes from historical land grants that can complicate things." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work. I ran a small custom furniture business out of my grandfather's old workshop, making tables and chairs and cabinets from reclaimed wood. It was honest work that kept me connected to my roots. My grandfather had been a master carpenter, and he had taught me everything he knew before dementia stole his memories when I was 19. He had passed away 2 years after that, but his workshop still smelled like him. Sawdust, linseed oil, and the cherry tobacco he used to smoke in his pipe. I was sanding a walnut tabletop when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He had found me a lawyer named Patricia Hughes who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being a bulldog in court. Her office was in Knoxville, and she could see me tomorrow afternoon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the history soaked into this land. The original log cabin that William Anderson had built was still standing, preserved and maintained on the east side of my property. During the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather had hidden Union sympathizers in the root cellar, risking his life because he believed slavery was wrong. My grandmother had taught me to identify every plant and tree on the property, showing me which ones were medicinal and which ones were dangerous. My father had taught me to hunt and fish in our woods and creek, to respect the land that sustained us. The next morning, I drove the hour to Knoxville. Patricia Hughes's office was in a renovated brick building downtown, and she greeted me with a firm handshake and sharp eyes that immediately put me at ease. She was probably in her early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from winning a lot of cases. "Tell me everything," she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad. I laid out the whole situation, showing her the papers Brenda had given me and my own property documents. Patricia listened without interrupting, making occasional notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "Okay, here's what we're dealing with. HOAs can be incredibly aggressive, especially ones like Meadowbrook Hills where the homes are expensive and the residents are used to getting their way. However, they have zero legal standing on your property. The question is whether they know that and are trying to bully you, or if there's been some kind of administrative error." "What kind of error?" "County mapping mistakes, incorrect survey data, fraudulent boundary claims." I've seen cases where HOAs tried to claim jurisdiction over properties that were explicitly excluded from their covenants, just because they were geographically surrounded by the development. It's rare that they succeed, but the legal process can be expensive and time-consuming. So what do we do? First, I'm going to file a cease and desist letter demanding they stop harassing you and acknowledge that your property is not part of their association. Second, I'm going to request all their documentation showing how they determined your property falls under their jurisdiction. Third, we're going to that county meeting prepared to bury them in historical records and legal precedent. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Thank you. I was starting to feel like I was going crazy." "You're not crazy. You're a property owner defending what's rightfully yours. That's as American as it gets. Over the next few days, Patricia worked fast. She sent the cease and desist letter via certified mail and started digging into county records. What she found was disturbing. When Meadowbrook Hills was developed in 2011, the developer had submitted boundary maps to the county that incorrectly included my property within their planned community boundaries. The error should have been caught, but it slipped through because the county clerk at the time was overwhelmed and understaffed. The developer knew your property wasn't for sale, Patricia explained over the phone. But they included it in their maps anyway, probably thinking they could pressure you or your parents into selling later. When that didn't work, they just ignored the discrepancy. Now the HOA, which took over from the developer in 2014, has either inherited that mistake or is actively trying to exploit it. Can we prove they know it's a mistake? That's what I'm working on. I've requested all the original development documents and correspondence. If there's any evidence that the developer or the HOA was aware your property was legally separate, it could constitute fraud. The county meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening. Patricia and I arrived early, and I was surprised to see how many people were there. The conference room was packed with Meadowbrook Hills residents, many of whom I recognized from seeing them around town. Brenda Patterson sat at the front table with two other HOA board members and a man in an expensive suit who I assumed was their lawyer. The county commissioner, a tired-looking man named Robert Mills, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the boundary dispute between Meadowbrook Hills HOA and Mr. Travis Anderson regarding property at 4782 Old Mill Road. Mrs. Patterson, you requested this meeting. Please state your case. Brenda stood up, all confidence and righteous indignation. Thank you, Commissioner Mills. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA has been attempting to work with Mr. Anderson for months regarding numerous violations of our community standards. Despite repeated notices and opportunities to comply, he has ignored our authority. We're here to ask the county to enforce our jurisdiction over his property and support our efforts to maintain the quality and value of our community. She went on for another 10 minutes, painting me as an obstinate troublemaker who was bringing down property values with my neglected land and eyesore buildings. It took everything I had not to stand up and call her out right there, but Patricia had coached me to stay calm and let the facts speak for themselves. When Brenda finally sat down, Commissioner Mills turned to me. Mr. Anderson, your response. Patricia stood, and her presence seemed to change the energy in the room. Commissioner Mills, members of the board, concerned citizens, my client's response is simple and supported by irrefutable evidence. Travis Anderson's property is not now, never has been, and never will be part of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. His family has owned that land continuously since 1847. 74 years before Tennessee even required property registration in its modern form. She began laying out documents on the overhead projector, old school style. The original deed, transfer records, tax documents, survey maps from multiple decades. Each one clearly showed the Anderson property as a separate, independent parcel. Furthermore, Patricia continued, we have evidence that the Meadowbrook Hills developer knowingly included the Anderson property in their boundary maps, despite having no legal right or agreement to do so. This map, submitted to the county in 2011, shows the Anderson property within the development boundaries. However, this letter, dated 3 months earlier, shows the developer's attorney acknowledging that the Anderson family declined to sell and that the property would remain independent. The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda's face went red. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear. Patricia wasn't finished. The HOA's harassment of my client constitutes trespassing, harassment, and attempted fraud. We are prepared to file a lawsuit seeking damages, legal fees, and a permanent injunction against any further contact, unless the HOA is willing to immediately acknowledge in writing that Mr. Anderson's property is not subject to their authority. Commissioner Mills held up his hand for silence. Mrs. Patterson, did you or your board have knowledge of this letter acknowledging the Anderson property's independent status? Brenda's lawyer stood up quickly. Commissioner, the current HOA board took over from the developer in 2014. Any communications from 2011 wouldn't necessarily have been transferred to them. But you knew the property wasn't part of the original development sale, correct? Patricia pressed. Mr. Anderson's property is clearly marked on county tax maps as a separate parcel with a different tax ID number. That information is publicly available. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The boundaries of the development and the boundaries of HOA authority aren't always identical. They are when your own covenants, conditions, and restrictions specifically define your jurisdiction as applying only to properties purchased from the original developer. Mr. Anderson never purchased property from your developer. Therefore, your HOA has no authority over him. Period. Commissioner Mills looked down at the papers in front of him, then back up at the room. Based on the evidence presented tonight, it's clear that the Anderson property is not part of Meadowbrook Hills HOA. The county will be correcting any mapping errors and will send written notice to the HOA to cease any actions against Mr. Anderson. This matter is closed. The room exploded in noise. Several residents were shouting questions. Brenda was arguing with her lawyer. Patricia calmly gathered her documents while I sat there feeling like I could finally breathe again. But as we left the building, Patricia pulled me aside. This isn't over. Brenda's type doesn't give up easily, and their lawyer looked more worried than he should be if this was just a simple misunderstanding. I want to keep digging into the developer's records. Something doesn't add up. She was right. 2 days later, Brenda showed up at my property again, this time with the county sheriff. My stomach dropped when I saw the patrol car, but Sheriff Tom Dawson was a decent guy who I had known since high school. He looked uncomfortable as he approached my porch. Travis, I'm sorry about this, but I have to serve you with papers. The HOA is suing you. I took the documents, and my hands tightened on the paper as I read. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA was suing me for property destruction, claiming that my neglect of the land was causing environmental damage that was affecting their properties. They were asking for an injunction to force me to remediate the land according to their specifications and seeking $50,000 in damages. This is insane, I said. Tom, you've been to my property. Does this look like environmental damage? Tom glanced around at the rolling meadows, the mature oak trees, the creek that ran clear and clean through the property. Looks like paradise to me, but I'm just serving papers, not making judgments. You'll get your day in court. After Tom left, Brenda lingered by her car. You could make this all go away, Travis. Just sell. I have developers who would pay you $3 million for this land right now. You'd be set for life. And there it was. This wasn't about HOA violations or property values or environmental damage. This was about land acquisition. Someone wanted my property, and they were using the HOA as a weapon to get it. Get off my land, Brenda, and don't come back unless you want to be charged with trespassing. Her expression turned cold. You're going to regret this. I called Patricia immediately. She was livid when I told her about the lawsuit. They're escalating because they know they're wrong. This is a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're trying to bury you in legal costs until you give up. What do? We fight. And we file a countersuit for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. If they want a war, we'll give them one. The next few weeks were hell. I had to hire a surveyor to document every inch of my property. An environmental consultant came out and confirmed that my land was in excellent condition, with healthy soil, thriving native plant species, and clean water. The meadow that Brenda had called unkempt was actually a carefully maintained native grassland that supported dozens of pollinator species. The report cost me $3,000, but it was worth every penny. Patricia also hired a private investigator to look into Meadowbrook Hills HOA and their connections. What he found was explosive. The same developer who had built Meadowbrook Hills in 2011 was planning a new luxury resort community on adjacent land. My property sat right in the middle of where they wanted to build their crown jewel, an 18-hole golf course designed by some famous golf pro I had never heard of. They've been planning this for at least 2 years, Patricia explained, spreading out documents on her desk. The developer, Pinnacle Properties Group, has been quietly buying up land around your property. You're the last holdout. Without your land, their golf course doesn't work, and without the golf course, they can't charge the premium prices they're promising investors. So Brenda is working with them. More than that. Brenda's husband, Richard Patterson, is a silent partner in Pinnacle Properties. He's invested at least $200,000 in the new development. If it fails because they can't get your land, he loses everything. I felt sick. This wasn't just about HOA busybodies with too much time on their hands. This was about money, serious money, and people who were willing to use legal harassment to steal what they couldn't buy. Can we prove she's using her HOA position to benefit her husband's business? That's exactly what we're going to do. And when we do, Brenda Patterson is going to be facing more than just a lost lawsuit. She could be looking at criminal charges. The preliminary hearing for the lawsuit was scheduled for mid-June. I had to close my workshop for a week to prepare, losing out on 2 custom orders that would have brought in $8,000. The stress was affecting my sleep, my appetite, everything. I called my sister Lauren and filled her in on what was happening. Travis, this is insane. Do you need me to come home? Not yet, but I might. If this goes to trial, I could really use your support. I'll be there. That land is mine too, even if I'm not living on it. Nobody's taking it from our family. Her fierce loyalty made me feel less alone. I had been carrying this burden by myself, but I didn't have to. This was bigger than just me. This was about honoring everyone who had come before us, everyone who had worked and sacrificed to keep this land in our family. The preliminary hearing was held in the circuit court in Sevierville. The judge was a sharp-eyed woman named Sandra Reeves who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Brenda's lawyer, a slick character named Gerald Morris, presented their case first. He tried to paint me as an irresponsible landowner whose neglect was causing erosion, water contamination, and decreased property values for the surrounding community. Patricia systematically destroyed every claim with expert testimony and documentation. The environmental consultant testified that my property was in better condition than most of the maintained lawns in Meadowbrook Hills, which relied heavily on chemical fertilizers and pesticides that were actually contaminating the watershed. The surveyor testified that there was no erosion and that my land management practices were preventing erosion on adjacent properties. Then, Patricia dropped the bomb. She presented evidence of Richard Patterson's investment in Pinnacle Properties and the planned golf course development. She showed emails between Brenda and the developer discussing strategies to acquire my property. In one email, Brenda had written, "We need to make his life so miserable he has no choice but to sell. Use every HOA mechanism available." Judge Reeves's expression darkened as she read through the documents. "Mrs. Patterson, are you present in the courtroom?" Brenda stood up, her face pale. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you write this email?" "I was speaking in frustration, Your Honor. Mr. Anderson's property is affecting our community values. According to the evidence presented, Mr. Anderson's property isn't part of your community. Yet you've been using your position as HOA president to harass him into selling property that would financially benefit your husband. Do you understand how serious that is? Your Honor, I was simply trying to protect our residents' interests." Judge Reeves cut her off. "Counselor Morris, I'm dismissing your client's lawsuit with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering the Meadowbrook Hills HOA to pay Mr. Anderson's legal fees and to issue a formal written apology acknowledging that his property is not subject to their authority. Mrs. Patterson, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible fraud and abuse of power. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down like thunder. I sat there stunned while Patricia squeezed my shoulder. "We won, Travis. It's over." But it wasn't quite over. As we left the courtroom, Gerald Morris pulled Patricia aside. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Patricia's expression grew increasingly angry. When she came back to me, she was practically vibrating with fury. "They want to settle the countersuit. They're offering $50,000 if we agree not to pursue criminal charges against Brenda. Can we do that? Can we drop criminal charges? We can choose not to cooperate with the prosecution. Without our testimony and evidence, the DA might not have enough to move forward. But Travis, if we let her walk, she could do this to someone else." I thought about it. $50,000 would cover all my legal fees and lost income, with plenty left over. It would also let me get back to my life without more months of legal battles. But it would let Brenda off the hook for trying to destroy my life for profit. "What do you think I should do?" Patricia looked at me seriously. "I think you should do what feels right for you and your family. There's no wrong answer here. I made my decision. Tell them no deal. If Brenda committed crimes, she needs to face consequences. Otherwise, she'll just find another target." Patricia smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that." The district attorney, a tough former public defender named Michael Torres, took the case seriously. He subpoenaed all the HOA records and Pinnacle Properties documents. What his investigation uncovered was even worse than we had thought. Brenda hadn't just been harassing me. She had been involved in similar schemes against 2 other property owners in the past 5 years. One had eventually sold out of exhaustion. The other had gone bankrupt fighting legal battles and lost their family farm. In August, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of power. Her husband Richard was also charged as a co-conspirator. The arrest made the local news, and suddenly, my phone was ringing off the hook with reporters wanting my story. I declined most interviews, but I did agree to talk to a journalist from the Knoxville News Sentinel who had been covering HOA abuse cases across Tennessee. "Your case is part of a bigger pattern," she told me. "HOAs have become increasingly powerful in the last 20 years, and there's very little oversight. When board members act in bad faith, homeowners often have no recourse except expensive litigation." The trial was scheduled for November. I spent the late summer and fall trying to get my life back to normal, but it was hard. Every time I walked my property, I thought about how close I had come to losing it. Every time I went into town, I saw Meadowbrook Hills residents and wondered if they had been part of Brenda's scheme or just innocent neighbors caught up in her greed. My sister Lauren came home for Thanksgiving, and we walked the property together on a cold, bright morning. The trees were bare, and you could see farther through the woods than in summer. We ended up at the old log cabin that William Anderson had built. "Do you ever think about selling?" Lauren asked quietly. "Not because of the HOA stuff, but just because it's so much responsibility." "Every day," I admitted. "Especially after Mom and Dad died. This place is full of ghosts, but they're good ghosts, you know. Every time I want to give up, I remember why we're supposed to keep it." "Tell me." I took a breath, trying to put it into words. "Because land is the only thing they're not making more of. Because our family shed blood and sweat and tears to keep this place going through depressions and wars and hard times. Because once it's gone forever. Some developer will bulldoze everything, put up houses or a golf course or a shopping center, and it'll be like we never existed." Lauren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry I left you to carry this alone." "You didn't. You built a life. That's what you're supposed to do. Still, when this is all over, I want to be more involved. Maybe come back for a month every summer and help out. This is my heritage too." The trial started on November 15th. The prosecution laid out a devastating case against Brenda and Richard Patterson. Email trails showing they had conspired with Pinnacle Properties to systematically harass property owners. Bank records showing Richard had taken out loans against their home to invest in the development. Loans that would default if the golf course project failed. Testimony from the other property owners Brenda had targeted, including a 78-year-old widow who broke down crying on the stand, describing how the legal stress had affected her health. The defense tried to argue that Brenda had genuinely believed she was acting in the HOA's interest, and that her husband's business dealings were separate from her HOA activities. But the evidence was too strong. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 3 years in prison, though the judge indicated she would likely serve 18 months with good behavior. Richard got 2 years. They were also ordered to pay restitution to me and the other victims, totaling over $300,000. Pinnacle Properties withdrew their development plans, and the land they had bought was eventually sold to a conservation trust. In December, I finally received the check for my legal fees from the HOA, along with a formal letter of apology signed by the new HOA president. The letter acknowledged that my property had never been part of their jurisdiction and promised that I would never be contacted by them again regarding HOA matters. I framed it and hung it next to the original property deed. Christmas that year was quiet but meaningful. Lauren came back, and we spent it in the old farmhouse with a fire in the fireplace and snow falling outside. We talked about Mom and Dad, about the land, about what we wanted to do with our lives. Lauren admitted she was burnt out on Seattle and the tech industry. She was thinking about moving back to Tennessee, maybe starting a remote consulting business that would let her work from the property. "You'd really move back?" I asked, surprised. "I miss it, Travis. I miss the land, the mountains, the space. Seattle feels cramped and artificial. And I miss family, even if it's just you." "Just me?" I pretended to be offended. "I'm a great family." She threw a pillow at me and we both laughed. It felt good to laugh, to feel like the weight of the past year was finally lifting. In January, I got a call from the conservation trust that had bought the Pinnacle Properties land. They wanted to know if I would be interested in placing a conservation easement on my property. It would ensure the land could never be developed, protect the environmental and historical value, and give me significant tax benefits. The easement would run in perpetuity, binding not just me but any future owners or heirs. I talked to Lauren about it, and we agreed it was the right choice. We worked with the trust to craft an easement that would preserve the land's natural state, while still allowing my furniture business and normal agricultural activities. We also included provisions protecting the historic structures, the original log cabin, my grandfather's workshop, and the farmhouse itself. The signing ceremony was in March, on the first warm day of spring. Representatives from the Conservation Trust, the County Historical Society, and the Tennessee Parks Department all came out. They took photos of me and Lauren standing in front of the old cabin, holding the signed easement document. The head of the Historical Society, an enthusiastic woman named Dr. Rebecca Stone, told us that our property was one of the best preserved examples of continuous family ownership in East Tennessee. "What you've done here matters," she said. "Not just for your family, but for everyone. This land tells the story of Tennessee, of America. It shows what's possible when people care for the land instead of just exploiting it." After everyone left, Lauren and I walked down to the creek. The water was running high with snowmelt, clear and cold. We sat on the bank where our grandfather had taught us to fish, where our father had proposed to our mother, where generations of Andersons had come to think and dream and plan. "We did it," Lauren said. "We actually protected it." "For now," I said, "but the work never stops. Someone will always want to turn it into something else. We have to keep choosing to preserve it every single day." "Then that's what we'll do." That spring, I expanded my workshop and started taking on apprentices, teaching young people traditional woodworking techniques. Lauren moved back in June, converting the old hay barn into a modern studio apartment with high-speed internet. She started her consulting business and also began documenting the property's history, interviewing older relatives and digging through family papers to piece together the full story of the Anderson family's time on this land. We also started hosting educational tours once a month, showing school groups and history buffs the old cabin, explaining the property's history, talking about land conservation and sustainable stewardship. Dr. Stone helped us apply for a state historical marker, which was installed in September. The bronze plaque read, "Anderson Homestead, continuously owned by the Anderson family since 1847. This property represents one of the oldest documented cases of family land stewardship in East Tennessee." I thought about Brenda Patterson sometimes, wondered how she was doing in prison, if she regretted her choices. Mostly, though, I tried not to think about her at all. She had tried to take something precious from me and failed. The land had survived worse threats than an overzealous HOA president with dollar signs in her eyes. One evening in October, about 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A young couple got out, maybe in their late 20s, and approached tentatively. "Mr. Anderson, my name is David and this is my wife Emma. We just bought a house in Meadowbrook Hills and we heard about what happened with the HOA. We wanted to apologize on behalf of the neighborhood." I stood up, surprised. "You don't need to apologize, you weren't involved." Emma spoke up, her voice earnest. "We know, but Brenda's actions affected everyone. A lot of us had no idea what she was doing. When the truth came out, we were horrified. The new HOA board is trying to rebuild trust and do things right. We wanted you to know that you have neighbors who support you and respect your property rights." David nodded. "We also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak at one of our HOA meetings. We're trying to educate residents about property rights, the history of this area, and how HOAs should operate ethically. Your story would really drive those lessons home." I considered it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Meadowbrook Hills ever again. But these seemed like good people trying to make things better. Let me think about it. Leave me your contact info. They did, and after they left, I discussed it with Lauren. She thought I should do it. You have a chance to prevent this from happening to someone else. That's worth something. So in November, I found myself standing in front of about 60 Meadowbrook Hills residents, telling my story. I talked about my family's history, the attempted land grab, the legal battle, and the importance of respecting property rights and ethical governance. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding. During the question and answer session, an older man raised his hand. "Mr. Anderson, some of us have been in this neighborhood since it was built. We never liked how the original developer handled things, but we felt powerless to speak up. Your case showed us that standing up for what's right matters. Thank you." Others shared similar sentiments. Many expressed shame about what had happened and gratitude that I was willing to forgive the community for the actions of its leaders. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. I realized I had been carrying anger not just at Brenda, but at the entire Meadowbrook Hills development. Talking to these people, seeing their genuine remorse and desire to do better, helped me let go of that anger. As winter approached again, I took stock of where I was. My furniture business was thriving with a 6-month backlog of orders. Lauren's consulting business was doing well, and she was genuinely happy being back on the land. The conservation easement was in place, protecting the property forever. I had even started dating someone, a teacher named Sarah who I had met at one of our historical tours and who appreciated both my dedication to the land and my terrible jokes. On Christmas Eve, Lauren and I were decorating the tree when she said, "You think Mom and Dad would be proud of us?" I know they would. We did what they taught us to do. We protected what matters, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. We finished decorating in comfortable silence, then stood back to admire our work. The tree was decorated with ornaments collected over generations, each one telling a story. A wooden star that William Anderson had carved, glass balls from the 1930s, clay handprints that Lauren and I had made in elementary school, a photo ornament of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. Lauren raised her glass of eggnog, to the land, to family, to doing the right thing even when it costs us. I clinked my glass against hers, and to the future, whatever it brings. Outside, snow began to fall softly over the Anderson homestead, just as it had fallen for the past 179 winters. The old farmhouse stood solid and warm against the cold, smoke rising from the chimney, lights glowing in the windows. Inside, 2 descendants of William Anderson celebrated the season and the victory, knowing that they had honored their ancestors' sacrifice and secured their legacy for generations yet to come. The land that had survived wars, depressions, natural disasters, and countless attempts to buy or steal it had survived one more threat. And it would survive whatever came next, because that's what the Anderson family did. We endured. We protected what was ours. We held fast to the land that held our history, our identity, our souls. In the spring, I received one final piece of closure. The State Attorney General's office launched an investigation into HOA abuses across Tennessee, inspired in part by my case and the journalists reporting. They were developing new regulations to increase transparency, protect homeowners' rights, and create oversight mechanisms to prevent abuses of power. I was invited to testify before the state legislature's Housing Committee about my experience. Standing in the state capitol, telling my story to lawmakers, I felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had been bullied by overreaching HOAs, everyone who had lost their homes or land or life savings fighting legal battles they should never have had to fight. Property rights are fundamental American rights, I told the committee. When organizations designed to maintain community standards become weapons to serve private interests, we've lost our way. My family almost lost land we've held for nearly 2 centuries because one woman wanted to profit from her position of power. That should never be possible. The reforms passed 6 months later. They weren't perfect, but they were a start. They required HOAs to maintain public records, submit to regular audits, and provide homeowners with a streamlined appeals process. They also created real penalties for board members who abused their positions for personal gain. I framed the newspaper article about the new law and hung it in my workshop, right next to a photo of my great-great-great-grandfather William Anderson standing in front of the log cabin he built. The photo was from around 1885, faded and sepia-toned, but you could still see the pride in his eyes, the strength in his stance. He had claimed this land and built a life on it. Every generation since had fought to keep it, and now I had fought my own battle and won. Years passed. Lauren met someone, got married in a ceremony held on the property, under the old oak tree where 5 generations of Andersons had married. My relationship with Sarah deepened, and eventually I asked her to marry me in the same spot. She said yes, and when we married the following spring, we planted a new oak sapling nearby to represent our union and our commitment to the land's future. Sarah moved into the farmhouse, bringing her own love of history and nature. She started a native plant nursery on part of the property, growing and selling the same wildflowers and grasses that had been there for centuries. The business complemented my furniture work perfectly, and together we created a sustainable operation that honored the land's past while ensuring its future viability. When Lauren and her husband had their first child, a daughter they named Willow, I understood why my ancestors had fought so hard. Holding my niece, showing her the creek and the cabin and the workshops, telling her stories about her great-great-great-great-great-grandfather William, I felt the chain of connection that linked past to present to future. This land wasn't just property. It was our story, written in soil and stone and stubborn determination. Brenda Patterson was released from prison after serving 16 months. I heard through the grapevine that she and Richard had divorced, that she had moved away from Tennessee entirely, starting over somewhere in Florida. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, no sense of revenge. Mostly, I just felt sad that her greed had destroyed her life and nearly destroyed mine. But I also felt grateful. Her attack had forced me to truly understand what the land meant, to fight for it in a way that made it even more precious to me. On the 10th anniversary of the day Brenda first showed up on my property, I organized a celebration. We invited everyone who had helped us. Patricia Hughes, Marcus Chen, the Conservation Trust people, the Historical Society members, our Meadowbrook Hills neighbors who had become friends, and family from across the country. We set up tables in the meadow, served barbecue and cornbread and sweet tea, and celebrated not just the legal victory but the land itself, and the community that had rallied to protect it. As the sun set and fireflies began to dance in the gathering dusk, I stood with Lauren and Sarah, looking out over the land that had been entrusted to our care. The log cabin stood sturdy and proud in the distance. The workshops hummed with possibility. The meadow swayed with native grasses and wildflowers. The creek sang its ancient song, and all around us, people who understood what this place meant gathered to honor it. "We did good," Lauren said softly. "Yeah," I agreed. "We really did." The land had tested us, as it had tested every generation before us, and we had proven ourselves worthy of the trust placed in us by William Anderson when he bought this 120 acres in 1847 with hard-earned money and bigger dreams. The land would test future generations too. That was its nature. But we had shown that the Anderson family still had what it took to meet those tests and prevail. As darkness fell and the stars came out above the Tennessee mountains, I felt my father's presence, my mother's love, the weight of all those who had come before. They were part of this land now, literally and figuratively, their ashes scattered in the meadow they had loved. And someday I would join them, and Lauren and Sarah and Willow, and all the Andersons yet to be born. We would become part of the land we had protected, our legacy measured not in money or possessions but in acres preserved, in history honored, in a promise kept. The HOA had tried to evict me from land my family owned for generations. They had failed. And in failing, they had only strengthened our bond to this place and our determination to protect it. For that, in a strange way, I was almost grateful. They had reminded me why this mattered. They had forced me to stand up and fight. And in fighting, I had discovered reserves of strength and purpose I hadn't known I possessed. As the party continued around me, music and laughter floating on the warm night air, I made a silent promise to the land and to my ancestors. I would continue to protect this place with everything I had. I would teach the next generation its value. I would never take for granted the sacrifice and vision that had preserved it for me, and when my time came to pass it on, I would do so knowing I had been a worthy steward, a keeper of promises, a guardian of something greater than myself. The Anderson homestead stood strong under the stars, just as it had for nearly 2 centuries. And with care, dedication, and the fierce love of those who called it home, it would stand for 2 centuries more.